issues like investor-state dispute settlement. So,
Order. Member will resume his seat. Jono Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, there's been a lot of talk this evening about eloquent speeches that people have made with very few notes. Well, I'd just like to assure the House that this won't be one of them. There are a few notes in front of me, and certainly eloquence on this topic is probably not what you're going to get from me. However, Mr Speaker, I do, at this point, want to commend Paul Foster-Bell, as my colleague Sarah Dowie said earlier. Pretty impressive to get a second private member's bill out. The first one, of course, was a very successful Anzac Day licensing one, and I think that was a very good bill. And this one, I'm sure, is going to be a very good bill once it comes into force as well, which I'm sure it will, having been through all stages of the parliamentary process. And it's great to see already from the speeches that we've heard from the other side of the House that there is wide support for it. I have to acknowledge, Mr Speaker, that when I first saw this bill and saw that it proposed changes to the Arbitration Act 1996, I misread it and thought that the Arbitration Act was 1966. Now, as someone who was born in 1966, I couldn't understand why anyone would want to change anything that originated in 1966, but then I've realised now that this is, in fact, the 1996 Act, which we are going to bring some changes to. Mr Speaker, I think there's some really good points that have been made already tonight, and I'm particularly pleased to see that this bill is going to bring us more in line with other international practices of arbitration law. Mr Speaker, I think generally I would say that that is a good thing, that we are aligned with international practice and law. Though I have to say, having visited the Australian legislature in the last couple of weeks, there's some things that go on over there that I don't think we want to be aligned with, particularly when it comes to protection orders for women across state and all that kind of stuff. But on this one, I think it is actually really important that actually when you do have disputes that cross international boundaries, that our laws are consistent with what you have in other countries. I was particularly, my ears pricked up a little, I have to say, when it was talked about that people may then make New Zealand their place of choice to bring arbitration. I thought that perhaps the Minister of Tourism might be interested. We could perhaps start an arbitration tourism venture. We're starting to see that happen already after Louisa Wall's marriage equality bill, where people are travelling here to get married. Perhaps, Mr Speaker, there's a tourism opportunity in the field of arbitration as well. Now, when it comes to this presumption of confidentiality, and I think it's interesting that this has been one of the things that has been talked about throughout this debate as we've gone on this evening. Now, from my lay background, it certainly seemed particularly appropriate when relating to trusts. Now, I will stand to be corrected, and I'm sure I will be when the time comes at Select Committee or otherwise. Mr Parker, when he spoke, his immediate place that he went to when talking about trusts was talking about the very wealthy who might sort of, protect their wealth inside a trust and for generations to come. My mind always goes immediately, because of my background, to charitable trusts, and I would imagine that for a charitable trust, having confidentiality when involved in an arbitration could well be a useful thing, because if there is some sort of dispute that's yet to be settled, having their good name sort of taken out there publicly may not be useful to them or to the people that they work for. So, Mr Speaker, at this stage I support the idea of there being a presumption of confidentiality, because that does in fact ensure that we can get things sorted clearly. And as my colleague Sarah Dowie said earlier, of course the proceedings of the arbitration would always be done in private as well. So, Mr Speaker, as I said, a good bill brought forward by Mr Paul Foster-Bell. As promised, this hasn't been eloquent at all, but Mr Speaker, I would normally say I look forward to discussing this when it comes through to the Select Committee. I'm not sure that on this particular occasion I will be enjoying it. Law is not my field as a general rule that I enjoy getting stuck into, but it will be an important piece of legislation for what is an important part of our legal system, and I commend it to the House.
Dennis O'Rourke.
Mr.